also want secure communities. We also want public safety to be number one on their agenda.
These people have been sentenced to life imprisonment in a foreign country with no due process.
The president at that time made it clear to the American public he was not going to tolerate illegal harassment and anti-Semitism taking place in violations of federal laws.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, quite possibly to your relief, certainly to mine, we're not opening the show talking about Wall Street or the stock market because it was kind of a sleepy day there. However, we are going to start by looking at a rules-based system upon which a free market democracy must depend, because a case we've been talking about here is back before a judge. That case involves a Maryland father mistakenly deported. It headed back to court today, and that happened 24 hours after El Salvador's president backed the Trump administration, refusing to bring this Maryland man back to the United States. We're also tracking tariffs. Why? Because the trade war, and that's what President Trump called it today, between China and the United States took on a new form, as a report from Bloomberg revealed that China has ordered its airlines to stop accepting deliveries of American-made Boeing planes. This while the European Union published a long list of American goods, from toilet paper to motorcycles, that it says will face retaliatory tariffs if negotiations with the Trump administration are not successful. Also, Harvard funding fight. America's oldest university and the iviest of the Ivy League schools rejected the Trump administration's conditions to alter its admissions and hiring policies. In response, the White House announced that it would freeze $2.2 billion in grants and some $60 million in contracts. It is also now threatening to remove the school's tax-exempt status. I want to start tonight with Vin Gomez, who joins me here at the desk, and Weijia Jiang at the White House on the North Lawn. Weijia, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Talk to us about what the administration said today about the case involving Kilmar Garcia.
So, Major, in this latest development, a federal judge was questioning the administration about why it is not facilitating the return of Garcia, as we have been talking about, even though that is what the Supreme Court ordered. And the Department of Homeland Security is basically saying we don't have jurisdiction over this individual because he is currently in El Salvador. And they wrote today in a response that if he were to come to a point of entry in the United States, then they would be able to facilitate his deportation to another country. Because, of course, what is at issue here is that the administration sent him to the one country that an immigration judge back in 2019 said he was not to go to for his own protection. And so now the Department of Homeland Security is saying if he can somehow make it from a mega prison, which he is being held in El Salvador, to a port of entry to the United States, we would be happy to facilitate his removal from the U.S. And of course, as you mentioned, Major, we did hear from the president of El Salvador here at the White House, who says, it's not my problem either. I don't have the authority to remove him right now from this prison, especially smuggle him is the word that he used back to the United States. So it continues to be a hot potato, Major, where neither government wants to take accountability for this person, this individual. And so we will now wait to see what the next move is.
And to your point, Weijia, there was almost a farcical statement from Homeland Security suggesting if he were to somehow make its way to a port of entry, he's not going to leave CCOT, the maximum security prison in El Salvador, on his own. That's simply not going to happen. I want to play for our audience sound from Kilmar Garcia's wife, Jennifer, who spoke today about these legal developments.
And I find myself pleading with the Trump administration and the Bukele administration to stop playing political games with the life of Kilmar. Our family is torn apart during this scary time, and our children miss their dad so much.
Weijia, I also want to talk to you about something that came up at the White House briefing today, because President Trump made mention of it yesterday. The idea of homegrown criminals in this country, meaning American citizens, possibly being sent to El Salvadoran prisons.
That's right. He repeated that idea, Major, during an interview when she says we are looking into it. He said he loved the idea of sending the worst criminals, who are American citizens, by the way, to another country so that they are no longer this country's problem. And he directed publicly the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to start looking into the legality of that. Well, last night, Bondi did an interview herself, and she was asked about whether this is something the U.S. can even do. And Major, she said these people need to be locked up as long as they can, as long as the law allows. We are not going to let them go anywhere. And if we have to build more prisons in our country, we will. So I asked the White House, because that seems to contradict the idea that you're going to look into other options if she's saying they're not going anywhere. And they sent a statement saying that Bondi and the president are united in their efforts, without clarifying why there was no unity in what she said compared to what the president and the White House press secretary reiterated today, which is that it's something that they are looking into. On top of that, the borders are. Tom Homan, who we heard from at the top of the show here, also weighed in, and he said he wasn't briefed on it at all. He's unfamiliar with this idea. He hasn't talked to President Trump about it, and so he was not going to weigh in on whether it's a legal possibility.
It would be a very, very hard way to look at that as any kind of permissible legal possibility. Maybe in this administration, the trialist of trial balloons. Hold on there, Weege. I want to talk to Finn about a couple of things. This relationship between President Trump and the El Salvadoran President Bukele is interesting. You have some insight into that. Please share it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, this is something, we just mentioned something about accountability between no one was taking accountability. I would argue that it's more than just that. There is a strategy and a sort of a wink and nod strategy, if you will, where they know exactly what they are doing. At least it seems that from the sources that
there are obligations to report things in court, but they're both playing hide the ball.
Right, exactly. It's a little bit like a soccer game in that respect, and I do think that what you're seeing right now is also is built upon a relationship that the Trump administration has with the Bukele administration, and it's a bit of an admiration as well for some of the policies that they've implemented. Bukele and Trump have some parallels and similarities, both in their stories and the way they govern. Right, they're both outsiders. They're both populists. They came from very similar sort of backgrounds. They came up and were disruptors in their own respective countries and populations.
Political atmospheres.
Political atmospheres, absolutely. And, they both use social media to sort of like amplify their voices. They both avoided debates when it came to it. All these things that you see. But also there's an aberration.
Trump likes him, too.
It likes him because, especially on one particular aspect, and that's how he cleaned up El Salvador. He did. His detractors say it was at the, at the
expense of civil rights.
At the expense of civil rights and
due process.
Absolutely, due process. But he detained 75,000 people in jails. In some of those.
Crime is way down.
Crime is way down. The gang violence is down. It's safe. I've been talking to some Salvadoran American community leaders here today who say, look, yes, these criticisms may be valid, but it is safe to return to El Salvador. Something that he's very, very popular.
And this alignment is part of this story.
It is, and also even if you look at the economic proposals that he has, he was the first country. He made El Salvador the first country to become to make Bitcoin legal tender.
Part of its currency.
Part of its currency.
Along with the dollar.
Right. That's exactly right. So they
also favorably caught the attention of the President Trump.
And his allies, and you've seen Don Jr. go down there and visit the president. You've seen Tucker Carlson go down there and visit the president. So there's some alliances there as well, outside of just the White House.
Very quickly, Finn, we're going to get to this later in the program, talking about the effects on American farmers of what is now declared by the president on social media, a trade war with China. Any conversations going on?
Well, I had a conversation with the Deputy Treasury Secretary today, Michael Falklander, at an event earlier today, where I asked him specifically. He had mentioned earlier that part of these tariffs, this tariff war now, this trade war was to get them to the table, was to get the Chinese to the table. I asked them specifically if it has materialized in any talks. They've talked about talks, and we heard Caroline Leavitt say today from the White House podium that it's up to China to make the first move. I asked him specifically. He had said that he did not know of any conversations between President Trump and President Xi. However, when I asked him specifically about lower-level talks, he said it was not appropriate yet for him to make any announcements. No clarity specifically on what that meant. However, we do know that the EU and the Chinese representatives of both governments met yesterday. One thing we're seeing as a side effect here is that our trade partners, the U.S. trade partners, are now starting to meet and potentially get closer to deals with China
make other considerations.
Continues. That's right.
And Weege, I want to go back to you on the north lawn of the White House very briefly, because this is a concern to major Fortune 500 companies, but it's even greater concern to medium and small manufacturers in this country.
That's right, Major. We're talking about thousands of small businesses and medium-sized businesses who just don't know what they're going to do to survive, right? Because they rely so much on Chinese imports, and they cannot afford to either import those goods in. We've talked to one business who says she'll probably have to just send the goods back to China because she can't pay the extra fee to get it across the line. And so they are talking to the White House. And interestingly, Kevin Hassett, who is one of the president's top trade advisors, said that we are fielding all these phone calls, that the Small Business Administration is talking to these businesses and trying to find a way for them, some options for them in the meantime as this trade war goes on. But the problem is there's no specificity. There's no details about what that means. And unless you're going to physically hand them relief, it's difficult for the small business owners to imagine what that is. Now, Hassett says that they are looking for ways that these companies can import stuff from other countries that do not have the same high tariff rate on them, the unbelievable 145% rate. But it's not that simple. We just spoke with a teddy bear manufacturer up in Vermont yesterday who said the problem is we can't get this fur, the goods that we use, from anywhere else for the same price, and we just can't afford it, Major. So it's a big ongoing issue.
Great insight, as always. Weege Jiang from the north lawn of the White House. Finn Gomez right here with me at the table. Thanks so very much. Harvard University says it will, quote, not surrender its independence. That's a quote in response to the Trump administration's conditions for the maintenance and continuation of federal funding. Our Nikki Batiste has the latest from Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Harvard University here is in a battle of beliefs with the Trump administration. In its latest move, the federal government has frozen about $2 billion in grants here at the university. That came after the president here at Harvard refused to comply with demands from the federal government regarding anti-Semitism and diversity issues here. The president wrote a letter to faculty and students and called these requests unconstitutional. Harvard is one of 60 schools that had been under investigation. We spoke with a medical professor here to get an idea of the real-life impact of these cuts. He runs a lab here. He said some of the research that could be impacted involves Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, cancer. And at another school we visited just yesterday, Johns Hopkins, an oncologist there said cuts at that school could mean ending clinical trials that save people's lives. That's some idea of what the impact could be on Americans. Back to you.
Nikki Batiste, thank you. Today is the deadline, if you didn't know it. Pay attention, for you to file your tax returns with the IRS. If you haven't done it, well, you have until midnight tonight. But inside the Internal Revenue Service, some questions are being asked, like, are pink slips coming? CBS News has learned the IRS has plans to cut up to 40% of its workforce after the end of this year's tax season. The White House has said these job reductions will make the agency more efficient, and the cuts, it says, will not disrupt services. The move comes after several high-ranking officials at the IRS quit over the administration's push to use taxpayer data to locate undocumented migrants. From the courts to higher education, is President Trump on a collision course with the Constitution? Next, legal analysis on the president's escalating battle against American institutions. You are watching America Decides.
The liberal establishment but they're not running things anymore in this country, and we're run by, and I don't say conservative, I don't say anything, we're run by people with great common sense.
Welcome back to America Decides. Trump administration not defying the courts so much as it's challenging them on many different fronts. It's targeting higher education, and it is trying to jawbone into complicity several very large D.C.-based law firms and firms that are based in New York as well. This raises a question that is now circulating in ways that just simply didn't circulate in the first Trump administration. Is the president driving this country towards something that could be accurately described a constitutional crisis? There's not an absolute answer to that, but for some insight into that conversation, I want to bring in Georgetown University law professor Andrew Schoenholtz. Professor, it's great to have you with us. I don't like the term constitutional crisis because I believe the Constitution is a mechanism by which we resolve things that look like a crisis, but I could be completely wrong. I'd like your interpretation.
Sure. So, generally speaking, when the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution and the government that implements the way in which the Supreme Court has made it clear what the Constitution says, there's no constitutional crisis. But we're in a particular moment now where there's a very excessive assertion of executive power. And that view of the presidency, more like a kingship, if you will, is challenging the other branches of government in terms of their responsibilities. And the courts now are analyzing these issues one by one. You had on your program earlier the discussion of Mr. Abrego Garcia's case. And there we're looking at the government having admitted that it made a mistake in deporting him to a very harsh prison in El Salvador, saying essentially there's nothing we can do about returning him here to the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court has made it very clear it ordered the government to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's release from custody in El Salvador and to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been if he had not been improperly sent to El Salvador. So the executive branch is now testing to the nth degree what it has to do to comply with the constitutional order that the Supreme Court has issued.
And Professor, it is sometimes oversimplified, the Kilmar Garcia case is, well, why are you asking all these questions on behalf of someone who's an illegal alien who's probably aligned with some sort of terrible gang? And the due process questions are one, but the other question, it seems to me, is just because an administration says something, brands you something, in this case, terrorist and gang member, even though they have provided no evidence to back up either assertion, you have questions about, well, what is the power of any government in this country to brand you something and then therefore have carte blanche to exercise whatever authorities it wants to exercise once it has so named you that thing?
And that very good observation, that is precisely what the administration is trying to achieve. That is, its own narrative on this is trying to convince the American people that anytime it brands either a non-citizen or, now we know, even a citizen in this way, it can deport that citizen to another country where they've contracted for imprisonment, as they have in El Salvador. That's a very dangerous point at this moment that the administration has brought us to. And it's a narrative that they would like to sell to the American people. But as you point out, number one, they have not provided that evidence to anyone in the court system, including the Supreme Court. So we don't know more other than that this is somebody who was in the United States for at least 10 years, there is an immigration judge who ordered that the United States not deport him to El Salvador because he proved to that judge that he would be persecuted if he were returned there. And the United States actually says it erroneously deported him. And the normal way in which this would be handled would be for the United States, as the Supreme Court has asked, to facilitate his return to the United States. It made a mistake, and you then facilitate that. And given that the United States contracted with the government of El Salvador to imprison somebody there, it's pretty clear that if the government wanted to comply with the Supreme Court's order, it could.
Very quickly, Professor, it's a reversible error that the government could reverse if it wanted to.
Precisely. It can definitely do that. They've sent him to the only country in the world where they promised by a court order that they would not send him.
Georgetown Law Professor Andrew Schoenholz, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Trump says his tariffs will increase the profits of farmers across our country. But the head of a group that represents tens of thousands of farmers, well, he begs to differ. I'll chat with him on the other side of this break, right here on America Decides.
The tariffs will go on agricultural product coming into America, and our farmers, starting on April 2nd, it may be a little bit of an adjustment period, but our farmers are going to have a field day right now. So to our farmers, have a lot of fun. I love you too.
If you're a large corporate farm, an adjustment period may mean one thing. If you're a small to medium-sized family farmer, it may mean something completely separate. President Trump has said, as you just heard, that his tariffs will ultimately accrue to the benefit of America's farmers. It's a pledge he reiterated this morning, posting on Truth Social, and I quote, "Our farmers are great, but because of their greatness, they're always put on the front line with our adversaries, such as China. Whenever there is a trade negotiation or, in this case, importantly, he says, a trade war." John Boyd joins me now. He is the president of the National Black Farmers Association. John, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. To my point, this idea of an adjustment period, if you're a large corporate farm, that means one thing. If you're a small to medium-sized family farmer, that means something completely different. Am I right about that?
Yes, and the president's trade war has put America's farmers in a pathway of complete destruction. It's planting season, and farmers should be planting their crops, but instead, the president is playing footsie with China. And recently, the beef industry, China was purchasing beef. They're now going to be purchasing that from Australia. That's $2.5 billion out of America's pockets. Recently, China purchased a large soybean order from Brazil. That's money out of America's farmers' pockets right now. So the president said in that speech that you just shown, farmers go out and have fun. There's nothing fun about losing your farm. And we have farmers on the line that are on the brink of complete failure. And right now, every time the president says the word tariff, the price drops and the markets, drop for farmers. Farmers are price takers, not price givers. So we have to sell corn, wheat, and soybeans based on what the markets are. We don't set the markets, and the president is causing havoc every time he says the word tariff. The prices drop, and bankers don't want to extend credit to America's farmers. For the first time in a very, very long time, I don't have a farm operating loan, and it's planting season because the bankers are telling me, Boyd, we can't lend you money based on the poor market price at $9 for soybeans and $5 for wheat and $4 for corn. So the president should put some things in place to protect America's farmers now, provide emergency loans for farmers right now, and not put us on the back burner while he has put us in the pathway of destruction with his trade war. Farmers didn't do this, the president did this.
And John, as I understand it, even before the tariff conversation initiated by President Trump, farmers were stressed out by weather havoc, lower than expected commodity prices, and other issues.
High equipment prices, And, the tariffs are going to make farm equipment go up because the steel is caught up in that. Farmers are now in the pathway of slow getting parts. We rely on parts that come from some of these other regions of the country to keep our tractors going, and combines and harvesters and planters. All of the things that affect everybody affect us first, and then it's passed on to the actual consumer. So here it is, America's farmers who voted for this president overwhelmingly in this country are the first to get punched in the face by this administration, and they're kind of leaving us dangling out here like a carrot in a negotiating type style, while we should be planning for our crop season. So it's a very, very troubling time for farmers, especially for small farmers. I want to be very, very clear. Small farmers don't have the time period, so to speak, 30 to 45 days to plant our crops. We have to get them in the ground. And farmers are calling us every day here at the NBFA, say, board shop, plant my crops, I'll sit this one out. It's complete havoc. It's complete, where farmers just don't know. Uncertainty right now is the word that I'm looking for with America's farmers. And the president should come out and make a national speech to kind of calm the waters here and bring farmers to the table, have a discussion at the White House, and engage us. Instead, we're learning about things from CBS News and other news outlets instead of engaging us and having us at the table. The Agriculture Secretary hasn't reached out to the NBFA to have a meeting, a sit-down meeting, to talk about any of these concerns that I'm laying out to you. So right now, we feel like we're the gambling card on the table, and it should be the other way around.
John Boyd, I appreciate your perspective. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for having me.
In this very, very difficult moment in American history, all of us have got to get outside of our comfort zone.
On the road and in a zone, Senator Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they are packing them in and pumping up voters on their Fighting Oligarchy tour. Next, our political panel looks at whether or not their influence within the Democratic Party is rising or about where it was, and many other questions. That's next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Bernie, he's a brand. AOC is a brand, and they have a tour right now called Fighting Oligarchy, and it's kind of propelling progressive lawmakers maybe to the front of the line to become the face of what amounts to Democratic Party resistance. And there are lots of opinions about how formidable or non-formidable that is. They've taken on the Trump administration, importantly, in front of very large crowds, including this one in Nampa, Idaho. Where is Nampa, you ask? Just outside of Boise. Watch.
We're here together because an extreme concentration of power, greed, and corruption is taking over this country like never before. You know, it's bone-chilling. Every day there's something new.
Joining us, tonight's political reporter panel, congressional reporter for the Washington Post, Mariana Sotomayor, to my immediate left, and the founder and editor of 24 Site News, Tom LoBianco, just across the desk over there. Mariana, I want to start with you. Look, back in 2016, there was this horseshoe effect in American politics where those who supported Bernie Sanders and those who supported Donald Trump were not as far from each other as they were from the establishments of both parties. That's still out there. And it appears that Bernie and AOC are tapping into that.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see both of them just going out there. That's a big lesson that Democrats have taken away from 2024.
Show up. What happens?
Exactly. Talk to people. Go into red states, red districts. But they're the only ones really doing it. And, you know, there is a little bit of this horseshoe effect that you're talking about within the Democratic Party as they try and figure things out. And what I mean by that is that, you know, a lot of the moderate blue dogs, let's say, in the House, are kind of talking and singing from the same page as those progressive caucus members when it comes to populism, trying to talk to the working class. They obviously have different ideas about how to get there and how to win over voters, but there's, again, these two very different groups ideologically who are trying to reach out to this working class, very frustrated base who just want to hear the same thing. Fight against the establishment, fight against, you know, these big businesses that are taking away your money. all of that is kind of coming to a head. But of course, the rest of the Democratic Party kind of questioning and watching to see just how much these progressives actually make inroads. Because again, another lesson of 2016 and 2018, that backlash to Trump was you can't go too far left because then the Democrats are going to end up right where they were in 2024.
Right, because, Tom, the White House says over and over again, they, meaning the progressive left, have lost touch with the American electorate. They point to the 2024 election. They point to the erosion of African-American, Latino voters, Asian-American voters, and say, go ahead, reacquaint yourself with your infatuation with the progressive left. Draw your crowds that will beguile you into thinking you're more popular than you actually are.
You know, and Mariana said this, you know, which part of the progressive left, right? Are we talking about social issues or economic issues?
Right.
And the more that you see, you know, I'm doing a reporting project right now, which will be published in a little bit. I don't want to say when exactly, but it's a
nice teaser.
A deep dive into an Indiana lieutenant governor who's kind of a second generation Mike Pence, if you will, very tapped in with the Christian right, the new Christian right. And I was out on the trail with him a couple weeks ago, and in rural Indiana, answering questions about the Department of Government Efficiency, gets a question about some of the spending cuts that they're doing. The money does not have a good answer for it. This comes up organically, and this is not
plants, you know, right.
It's at the Rotary.
Okay, not exactly the place you're going to find Democratic plants at the Rotary Club. Yeah.
I was fascinated, and I think this goes to what we're seeing.
And that tells you what? That there's something out there that's bubbling that maybe conservatives need to pay a little bit more attention to?
Very much that, whether we call it Democratic Tea Party, but very organic energy. I just keep thinking about the way that a lot of Republicans are responding right now, the way Pelosi used to 16 years ago. Well, this is not real. We don't need to worry about this. Ads on Craigslist. You know, I've seen people respond, okay, fine. If you would like to get paid, then respond to whatever that ad is and please show up. You know, I think it's real. I'm seeing it out there in the field anecdotally.
And Mariana, the place that this is going to most clearly and visibly manifest will be in recruitment for Democrats in House races. And I know they're feeling very bullish about that. They keep adding Republicans to their list of potential targets next year.
Yeah, and I will say some of those Republicans were kind of surprising on that list because they do represent safe districts. I've already heard from some of their own aides who've moved out to those states already.
From their place here in D.C.
Yeah, from their place here in D.C.
To pay more close attention to what's going on the ground.
Yes.
In those districts.
Exactly. And this was even before, in some cases, before Trump even won, because they remember what it was like in 2018. It was such a slaughterhouse, frankly, for Republicans on the Hill in the House. Democrats won big, and Democrats are hoping for that. But it's also causing a little bit of concern from this more pragmatic class of Democrats who don't want the party to take away the wrong lessons if they win big. It doesn't mean, again, go far left. It means keep listening to people on the ground, and especially because at this time, Democrats don't really have a united message on a multiple of different issues. So again, Democrats, as much as they are on the pathway historically to potentially take back the House, there's, again, just too many lessons that still need to be learned before they can actually get there and say, we won this on our own.
Right. Tom, I'd like to get your perspective on something that's gone on this week, which is the great miniaturization of the Trump presidency. Meaning, this is a presidency that's super powerful. The president says all the time he's exercising executive power in new and bold ways. He's had the most, in his terminology, successful, ambitious 100 days in American history. And yet, with Kilmar Garcia, he is utterly powerless. He has no agency whatsoever to do anything to reverse an error his own administration has admitted to in court.
Yeah, it's, I mean, this reminds me
that's not how they would describe it, but that's the way to look at it.
Yeah.
I'm powerless. I can do nothing.
All powerful to no power. It reminds me of like a lot of the talk with like UFOs and drones and whatnot from a couple months ago. I think it was the first White House press briefing. You know, Caroline Leavitt repeated the same thing John Kirby had said like a month earlier. Okay, nothing there. Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a huge audience for UFOs, UAPs, or whatever. Could be answered very easily, like a JFK document dump, for instance, which revealed CIA secrets, but not more about JFK.
Right.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing, this dichotomy, is starting to become more apparent. I mean, the further we get away from Inauguration Day, the further we get away from, there's a miniature bump and some incredible books out right now regarding the Biden presidency. John Allen, Amy Parnes out with another great deep dive fight.
Chris Whipple,
yeah,
just had him on the show yesterday.
Whipple, incredible. Another Hoosier, Ron Klain. Always, wherever you go, there's a Hoosier. But we're getting so far away from Biden did it to the point where it's like just Trump, 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 Trump.
The ownership begins to apply and begins to stick. Tom LoBianco, Mariana Sotomayor, thanks so much for being with me. I appreciate it. Faced with violent crime, growing homelessness, and what many regard as a stagnant economy, New Mexico's Democratic governor has declared a state of emergency in the city of Albuquerque, which is the biggest in New Mexico. Dozens of members of the New Mexico National Guard have been mobilized to help Albuquerque police. The move, though, is facing some criticism from watchdog groups who are concerned about militarizing civilian law enforcement. Jason Allen is following all this and joins me from Albuquerque. Jason, what can you tell us?
Major, good afternoon. This has been an interesting, curious move. It's no secret that this part of the city here in Albuquerque, as you just mentioned, has struggled with crime, with shootings, homicides, homelessness, open-air drug use. We have seen it in our time here. And so that's why the police chief a few weeks ago reached out to the governor, said, we need help. They said, we've made progress with crime, but we don't want to lose the momentum. When National Guard members get here, though, they won't look like National Guard members. They won't be in fatigues. They won't be out on the street in military vehicles. They won't be taking on any policing duties. Instead, picking up some of those assistance roles, guarding crime scenes, maybe offering emergency aid. And when we talked to the police association here in Albuquerque, the president there questioned just what kind of effect these National Guard members might really be able to have.
Albuquerque's a wasteland. Like, it is absolutely ridiculous. But I don't think that bringing in the National Guard in polo shirts, handing out water, is going to be the type of support that our police officers need. They don't have the authority to take anybody to jail. They're not armed. They're going to be in one of the most violent communities in this country, in a polo shirt, recognizing themselves as this helper, and they're limited onto what they can do.
And so city officials really believe that this is going to free up officers to get to the other emergencies around the city that maybe right now they haven't been able to get to. Major?
Jason Allen on the scene for us. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Here's a question. Kamala Harris, is she going to run again? The answer? Maybe. It's always maybe in politics, but not necessarily for the office that she once had or the one she campaigned for as nominee last year. We've got more on all of that right here on America Decides.
We can't go out there and do battle if we don't take care of ourselves and each other. Please take care of yourselves, be blessed, and I'll see you out there. I'm not going anywhere.
A recognizable face of former Vice President and presidential nominee Kamala Harris, telling everyone California's not going anywhere. But where is she going to go, politically speaking? Well, that's a question the New York Times tried to ask and answer. Tyler Pager is one of the authors. So, Tyler, thanks for being with her. Good job on the article. What do you think the answer is?
It's a great question. A lot of people are asking. Increasingly in conversations we had with many of her allies, former aides, current aides, it seems increasingly that she is leaning toward a run for California governor. That has not been fully decided yet, and obviously with all politicians, nothing is official until it's formally announced.
Exactly.
But increasingly her activity, her conversations, and her interest seems more geared to that race next year.
And that would inevitably foreclose a 2028 presidential bid, would it not?
Ostensibly, yes. The way that she's presented it to people she's discussed it with is that it's a binary choice, either running for California governor or running again for president in 2028. Some allies have pointed out that she would be young enough to run again in 2032 should she forego this run. Doesn't officially close the door, but politically speaking, it's a choice between those two races.
And do those close to her perceive it as a sort of foregone conclusion if she does announce that she would not only be the front runner of the Democratic primary, but in all likelihood, the runaway winner?
For the California governor,
yes.
that is what they assume, and there are people already in the race who have basically said that they would withdraw and clear the way for her, but not everyone has.
Javier Becerra has not. Former HHS secretary of the Biden administration.
Yeah, one of her former colleagues who replaced her as Attorney General as well. So there is a belief that she would be the clear frontrunner, particularly from those close to her. She obviously has the stature of a former vice president and a network of running 2 presidential campaigns that would bolster her efforts. But it is not clear that she would automatically run away from the race. There isn't a lot of polling yet to really determine what the race would look like with her in it. But there is belief that the race would be much easier for her than, of course, running for president again.
So there's 2 ways to look at Kamala Harris, if you're a California Democrat or if you're a Democrat who lives in another state. And there's a fascinating anecdote in your piece about the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race. It was high visibility nationally just a couple of weeks ago. Control room, that's graphic number 2. I want to read from it. Ms. Harris's offer to visit Wisconsin was rejected as a potential distraction during early voting, according to people briefed on the discussions. And even the Zoom call, the vice president was on a Zoom call with activists in Wisconsin among the Democrats, was kept private until after the polls closed at the request of Wisconsin Democrats. It doesn't mean she's radioactive, but it means there is more than a little bit of sensitivity about involving her publicly in any contested space outside of California.
Certainly, and I think some of the important context there was that the Democrats in that state were trying to make the race about Elon Musk, who poured in a lot of money and publicly appeared days before the election to bolster the Republican-favored candidate in that race.
Don't do anything that might increase awareness and mobilization on the right.
Absolutely, and I think that was the intention there. But it is obviously a stark reminder that Kamala Harris lost that state in November and remains a divisive figure for some Democrats who feel that she was maybe not the best person to take the mantle up from Joe Biden and maybe was not the strongest candidate. Obviously, she didn't win the election in November. So I think that is something that she and her team and allies and advisors are ruminating over as she decides what her political future looks like. And as we report in the article, a lot of that is just that rumination period is some reflection and frustration over the circumstances with which she inherited a campaign and ultimately ended up losing to Donald Trump.
2 quick questions. Timetable, and if she runs for California governor, does she run against the record of Gavin Newsom?
So on the timetable, I think we're expecting to see some sort of more declarative announcement later this year around summertime. One contingent factor there is that the funding she's provided for the post-vice presidential office runs out after 6 months. So
that's sometime in July?
Yeah, she needs some sort of fundraising vehicle to raise money. And does she run against the record of Gavin Newsom? I think they are frenemies, as some people put it. They've known each other for decades. They have some of the same political advisors, and they have worked closely together. So I think what exactly the message would be is premature, but there's definitely a rivalry there.
And it's a question that will hang heavily if there is a candidacy. Tyler Pager, great job. Thanks for having me. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.